the sturdiness of our faith isn't in the strength of my legs. It's in the solidness of the ground. And so if the resurrection really happened, I can have weak faith and it's still true. And so when it comes down to why I believe it, I love to tell people about it. And often I say, I could be wrong. Check the facts. Let's talk about it more together.
Well, I want to talk in part 2 here about the resurrection. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to part 1, we hope you will, where Don and I had a discussion about why believe, and then particularly reasons we don't believe, and then how we can interact with our own questions of faith, but then also maybe have ways that we can interact with others that do have questions by listening and basically interacting with their own questions. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to part 1, I hope you'll be able to do that. But we want to focus specifically on part 2 on the resurrection. And the reason this impacted me particularly is reading something that Don Barkley, as you know, and from part 1, introduced me to, in saying there is nothing more significant in his own faith journey than the resurrection. So Don, welcome back. We're glad that you can be here to talk a little bit more about the resurrection with us.
Thanks, Evan. Great to be back.
As I mentioned, you had, and I mentioned this in part 1, that Paul really threw all of the chips on the table when he said in 1 Corinthians 15:14, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is in vain and our very faith is in vain. And I believe you have said to people, skeptics and others, to say that the single foundational piece for you in terms of your belief comes and is founded upon the resurrection. So tell me about that, and then how, when somebody's interacting with you about the resurrection, why that's significant and how you work through that with someone.
Sure. And I really do believe that. And you're right. Personally, I've come to places where I was challenged by somebody, read something, a skeptic or whatever that was smarter than I was, and had a moment of a season of doubt. And what it comes down to is, if Christ rose from the dead, then that pretty much settles it. And that's really the attitude of Paul. He says, if Christ didn't rise from the dead, then our faith is worthless. And that's really unique among all the different world traditions, religious traditions, that it's actually testable in that way. I remember one person at an open forum, which I described in the last segment. A group of people gathered, and this skeptic came, and what we had in common was we were both reading the Da Vinci Code together. And at one point I gave kind of my 2 cents, as I said, this is my opinion. And at the end I said, and I could be wrong. And driving home, he said, that was the most powerful thing I heard tonight, that you could be wrong. I said, why was that powerful? He said, because it shows that what you're believing isn't just a basis of faith or how you feel or how you were raised or preconditioning. You really believe that this is actually true, and that if it's not, you would abandon it. I said, yeah, that's really the case. And the resurrection puts us in that place where the sturdiness of our faith isn't in the strength of my legs. It's in the solidness of the ground. And so if the resurrection really happened, I can have weak faith and it's still true. And so when it comes down to why I believe it, I love to tell people about it. And often I say, I could be wrong. Check the facts. Let's talk about it more together.
Doing that really does take some of the tension out, and lets people, it takes you out as, quote, the authority, so don't argue with me.
Right. Yeah.
It shows there is a faith element to whatever we believe.
That's right. There is a faith element, right? And it's not 100% faith. It's not all faith, but there is a faith element, is that it's very, very, very probable that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, and is the best explanation for the empty tomb after a public crucifixion.
Yeah.
And if you have a better answer to that question, I'd like to know it, because I'd rather find the truth than just be right.
Yeah, you had I thought it was really a great way to give an elevator illustration, something quick for somebody saying, so what is it? What are the pieces of the resurrection? What is it that convict you? And you used an illustration. I thought it was really
I
helpful.
did, yeah. I remember following my dad, who was following his dad, my grandpa, up in the mountains, Bighorn Mountains, outside Worland, Wyoming, before I moved to Sheridan and met you. And they each had a fly rod in their hands, and so did I. And they always, when they hiked, they always had their fly rod ready to cast. They just unclip the fly and throw it in. And so in backpacking, especially with my sons over the years, that's what I've done too. And there's no better feeling than being away from all the people, coming up over a little rise and seeing a little mountain lake and some concentric rings spreading, and you're seeing them spread. You don't have to see what caused it. You just know it's pretty likely you don't see a dragonfly that had just landed. And so whatever caused it was under the surface. And so I unhooked my fly and I cast there in the center of those rings, not because I saw the fish, but because those rings happened because of the fish. And so the resurrection is kind of like that. I wasn't there and you weren't there to see it, but there are some ripple effects. The ripples on the water tell me that something had to make the ripples. And so that's how I start. Yeah. And I talk about 3 ripples.
Yeah, talk about those ripples. I think those are helpful categories for people that are looking to say, well, why do you believe the resurrection?
Well, good. It's not as tight or as beautiful as an academic outline, for instance, but to me, it's worked as a summary. The first ripple is the effect that it had on Jesus' followers. And I'll just summarize them first. The second is the effect that it had on the city where he died, where Jesus died. And the third is the impact or effect that it had on the enemies of Christianity or followers of Christ. And so that's kind of it. And so first, I'll say, would you like to hear more about those? Well, sure. So, first, the effect of the followers is that they believe something unbelievable. It's unbelievable. If you think that a person is dead and stays dead, then you're normal. And they believe the same thing. And so for them to believe the incredible is incredible itself. And they were willing, and there were many of them that did. The story, and they say that Jesus appeared to them over a period of about 5.5 weeks, which sounds less religious than 40 days, but it's about the same. If you have a relative come and live with you for 5.5 weeks, you don't have to wonder or doubt whether they actually existed or not. You know that you saw them. And so if they saw Jesus, and so they were willing to tell that story. And Christianity is not so much a set of beliefs as it is an account of what they saw. And what they continued to say was, this Jesus who you saw crucified, God raised from the dead, and we saw him. And we saw him again and again and again. And it made a difference in their lives. And they were willing to go to their deaths with that story. And we don't know how all of them died, but we know how Peter died, how Paul died, executed by the Romans. And as Gary Habermas, one of my favorite authors on the subject, says, is liars don't make good martyrs.
That's right.
And so that's the
first.
first.
So many of them, you say, well, maybe one would be stupid enough, but when you say that
Right.
It's over and over and over again, dying for what they knew to be was a lie,
And nobody stepped forward to save their life and told the truth. Oh, we stole the body, or we went to the wrong tomb, or he really didn't die, or whatever. They continued to tell the story to their dying day. And that says a lot to me, that they believed the incredible, and they convinced other people to believe the incredible. So this peasant class of folks convinced Roman officers like Sergius Paulus on Cyprus that it was true, convinced priests and religious leaders who were part of the enemy coalition, like Nicodemus and Josephus, Joseph of Arimathea, rather, that it was true, etc. And so the second ripple effect is the effect that it had on the city. This is a public event we don't have to have the New Testament to know that Jesus Christ was executed at the hands of Pontius Pilate and his army and on a Passover. We know that from non-New Testament texts as well, from non-Christian sources. And we know too that Christianity grew at an amazing fast pace all of a sudden. And the book of Acts says that within, say, 50 days of the crucifixion, that 3,000 citizens of Jerusalem who were there for the festival of Pentecost, the Jewish festival, came to faith in Christ. And in order to come to faith that Christ was risen from the dead, they had to believe that this man who was publicly crucified just a couple of days before and had a parade a few days before that. So he was not an obscure, under the radar person, that one was seen risen and walking around, and they believed it. They bought it. That's the second ripple effect. And then third is,
before you get to the third, let me interrupt just one thing, because I think you hit a significant point that comes up in my discussion. I'm sure it does with yours too, is quickly to say, yeah, but you're quoting from your own sources. And so it's just your biblical sources. Many are not aware that there's extra biblical sources, beyond the Bible that affirm the same thing. So I know that's a whole nother subject in terms of talking about the validity and reliability of the scriptures, but just talk about that and how you address that before you get.
I will, first of all, I will camp on the idea that if we had no New Testament at all, we would know that the main events of Jesus' life and that his alleged appearance, his alleged resurrection, was spoken of by non-Christian sources around by the time of the first century was coming to a close. Tacitus and Suetonius and Jewish Talmud eventually also. But the challenge that while it comes from your sources, I'd say, the book of Acts, for instance, is the one that I quoted. It's a book that's filled with details that can be checked out or tested. It mentions 3 Roman emperors, several Roman governors, I think 5 Roman governors by name, mentions specific titles, like he knew the difference, whoever the writer was, knew the difference between a lictor and a praetor, a prelate and a proconsul, a legatus, an asiarch. And the thing is, a lot of these different provinces of Rome had different titles, just like sometimes different universities have a president or a chancellor, but this was even more elaborate. And whoever was writing it knew the names. And there were those many scholars, one particular, William Ramsay, who had been trained in the German higher critical school and had just the understanding that the book of Acts was basically legendary, that it was a story written by people of faith, until he devoted 20 years or so, as I understand, 2 terms of study in what used to be Asia Minor, what we know as Turkey. And he actually became a believer in Christ eventually because of the geographical, in particular, accuracy against what he had formerly thought was state-of-the-art knowledge. He found that whoever wrote this, if it's Luke, which most Christians believe it is, then he was an excellent historian. And the list goes on and on. Those who doubted, and then were early on in the century, 1900s, and then lots of study. Ramsay, I want to say I. Howard Marshall.
Well, I remember one, Don, that I was probably in college that really impacted me was Frank Morrison had a book called Who Moved the Stone?
Yep.
And same thing, he was a skeptic, atheist, whatever, and he said, all I have to do, he read this verse by Paul, said, all I have to do is disprove the resurrection, the whole thing falls apart.
Yep.
I don't know how long trying to disprove it, and was so overwhelmed he became a Christian, wrote the book, citing many of the things you're talking about. So it goes on and on. Yeah.
It does. And if a person who's listening wants to do just one thing that's kind of fun, and I would say pretty an independent source, is just go to Wikipedia and its article on William Mitchell Ramsay, this professor at the University of Aberdeen, who went through this epic change in his attitude toward the book of Acts. It's one place that's just a good place to start, and it's, you can hit other places, and because Wikipedia, it's not coming from a Christian publishing house. I encourage people, use Wikipedia. Look it up, just see what's out there. You don't have to be afraid about reading anything. I'm not afraid. If you find something that might be different than what I'm saying, I'd love to know about it. So
that's excellent. That's excellent. That'll be a good resource we'll point people to. That's great, Don. So there's a third ring.
There is a third ripple. There's a third ring in the ripples, and that's the effect that it had on the enemies. And I'd say, the fact that Christianity, they say it's history is written by the winners. And so Christianity kind of could have written into it the empty tomb. But the thing was, they weren't winners until basically Constantine, in 312, when he professed Christianity, the emperor himself. But until then, there were ebbs and flows of sometimes severe persecution against Christians. And if they early on had simply found the body of Jesus, given some sort of alternative reason for the empty tomb, they had every reason to do it. And then front and center comes this guy, Saul of Tarsus, who was an arch enemy of the Christian movement, to the point where he was rounding people up to have them executed. And he has a change of mind. And he says, because I saw the risen Christ. And then he spends the rest of his life arguing that it's true. And he's the one that says, if Jesus isn't raised from the dead, then our faith is worthless. And of all men, we are most to be pitied. And so that's why I would say the ripple effects themselves, and then I would just say, so what do you think about that? What are some criticisms that come to mind? What does it make you wonder about? And out of that can come more discussion.
And once again, you leave it in their hands or in God's hands, just to see where God takes that. And I imagine, Don, I know you've led many, many people to Christ. It's often over a long period of time. It's through your friendship. It's playing tennis. It's grows out of an open forum. It's being alongside people, and that does take an investment. And as you said, it's hard. There's a cost that comes with that. But understanding that we're part of this eternal cause, I think that's got to bring you a lot of joy in terms of knowing you're bringing people through Christ to find some eternal hope.
It does. And many, many times I tell people, if you feel like you're a failure at doing this, then you're right in the right place.
Yeah.
Because you're sensing how big an issue this is. And now you're center state, you're front and center to watch what happens, what God can do. And you just be there, be faithful, prepare to answer questions. But in the meantime, love them and pray for them and introduce them to your Christian friends, your favorite Christian friends.
Yeah.
And get them around your friend and watch the process happen and abandon your agenda.
Yeah.
Watch God work.
And God just brings those opportunities out of the blue. Just a month ago, I was playing golf. Guy I'd never met, friend of a friend, brought him along, and he's playing horrible. I mean, the cuss words are flying and the golf clubs are flying, and I can tell this guy's just not having fun. We're literally walking up the 18th fairway, and just out of the blue, I just kind of walk up beside him and just start talking. He says, I just feel so much stress in my life all the time, and I just have no peace about anything.
Oh.
And it was just this, instead of trying to figure all that out, wow, so where does that come from?
Mm.
And that just began a little bit of a conversation. Of course, then you have to go up and chip and putt. So we're beginning to, next time, to begin to have that opportunity. And I guess for all of us, there's just realizing this is God's timing and God presents the opportunities, and just don't miss the opportunity to ask a question. Yes. And not try to fix them immediately.
Right.
To engage with them. So
great.
You guys, in terms of you, Don, and the ministry, God bless Search Ministries for the way you have helped so many people, and some of the models in how you've worked to help people just engage and ask those kinds of questions. So thank you for this conversation today. I think it's going to be a big lesson.
Thanks for the encouragement. And God is a big, big God, and he loves your non-Christian friend, relative, even more than you do. And often all we have to do is stand back and watch him work. But in the meantime, we can love him and listen to him, pray for him, and be ready to give an answer.
Exactly.
Take the Search Apologetics course, or take the Your Apologetics course.
Yeah.
That's what I meant to say, Evan. That was a slip. Yeah.
That's okay. We'll give you a little closing plug here too. So. And seriously, we hope you will check out Search Ministries. And also, as Don has mentioned, we do have over 170 free courses at christianuniversity.org on a number of topics. So feel free to enjoy those. It's just part of the ministry of Our Daily Bread without cost or obligation. We just want to minister to you. And especially today, if you've had some questions, maybe you are coming more as a skeptic or having your own questions, find someone that you can just have these kinds of conversations with, or contact us on our website. We just love to engage with you, but don't let those questions go unanswered, because eternity is at stake, and eternal hope that can start now through eternity. So we just hope you'll take advantage of that. So God bless you, Don. You've been a great encouragement to so many and to me personally. So thanks for taking the time today to join us.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks. It's been a privilege and pleasure to be with you.
All right. God bless.
Yeah.